Hello there. Before we start the pod tonight in earnest, Lucy and I had a chat and we felt it was only right to pause for a minute to begin with to reflect on one particular thing that happened this weekend. I think it's only right we take a moment to quietly reflect on a tragic event which occurred and send our best wishes to the victim of a heinous crime which shocks not only us, but all those connected to Chelsea Football Club, the wider footballing world, and hell, all of the world. Let's have a moment silence now to honour the tremendous bravery of Edouard Mendy following the horrendous injury inflicted by West Ham's Jared Bowen. Basically, an assault. As I said, our best wishes go out to him and his family, and we really hope he recovers quickly from what was a frankly disgraceful challenge. And we hope he's back to full fitness soon. Now, let's close our eyes and send some positive thoughts for the next minute. Anyway, let's get on with it. That's the only VAR reference I'm going to make on this pod. But we're back finally after, well, quite a while. Lucy is back to join me after a Liverpool-esque record of turning up and being MIA to start the season. I think this hopefully will be an unbroken stint now for you. You all right? Did you enjoy your holidays?
They were very good, thank you. But I was feeling much better before I went to Molineux at the weekend to watch Che Adams miss a header from a yard and accidentally handball it into the net. But that's by the by. I shall be firmly tuned into FPL until the festive period now, although I can't make any promises about mentions of VAR. We are Who Got the Assist. You can find Tom on the main account at WGTA underscore FPL, and you can find me at Lucy Hynett with two T's. And our good friend Nick as well, who I shouldn't forget, at WGTA underscore Nick. On the pod today, we'll be discussing team structure. Is now the right time to think about three up top and a move away from big at the back? Plus, we'll have the usual game week reviews, market forces, a Q&A, and so forth. We're recording in the evening of Monday, the 5th of September, so please keep that in mind, especially with the Champions League restarting this week.
Yeah, yeah, one of those. Again, I'm glad that we've kind of started to put timings in now, just because I didn't, like, if there's a big injury or something, people always go, "Oh, why didn't you pick this up?"
Yeah, I
We
thought we'd
record on a
have to
Monday.
do. Yeah, something
Yeah,
big is going to happen this week, surely. Surely to
let's
mix it
see.
up.
Let's see. Right, let's move on to the main topic this week, which is should we leave big at the back behind? Good question. I had a good question on this on the midweek pods. So I did a very quick turnaround one on Thursday after I got back from France. So and FPL Fell wrote in then, and he asked about big at the back as it failed yet, etc., etc. And I kind of wanted to expand on that a little bit this week, just because obviously this week again we've had a fairly poor week in terms of those defenders, and I think looking at the core components on that pod last Thursday, by which I mean the teams which comprise big at the back, the root cause was the drop off in Liverpool and to some extent Chelsea, and that's really writ large in the XGA, expected goals against data and FB ref. So Liverpool fourth lowest, Chelsea sixth lowest. Yeah, that sounds great, but on a per 90 level, as I said last week, those numbers aren't very good compared to last season. So, I mean, Lucy, you have pilloried to start off with pre-season for predicting the return of the forwards, thinking that big at the back maybe would have, I don't know whether it vanished, you thought, but maybe it would be something that wouldn't quite work this year. But how are you thinking about big at the back right now? I know you're still kind of in the team that I was in until Saturday/Sunday, which we'll come on to later.
Well, yeah, I kind of abandoned my theory that forwards would come back. And then just as I did, they all came forward with their goals, and there I was stuck with big at the back and nowhere to really get them. I think it's quite a difficult one in the sense that obviously we've had Haaland produce kind of ridiculous returns, so that's locked out one space. And then of course Jesus has locked down the second spot. Kind of even without kind of consistently delivering, he's got those good stats, he's got good fixtures. So really, you've not really looked at anyone else. So that's limited our flexibility to a certain extent because we've got these two positions locked out. And now we've got Mitrovic and we've got Tony, and a couple of others that are maybe kind of just about to creep onto the radar. And I think people are now thinking, well, if we've got those two positions locked out, how do we adjust to get in the likes of Mitrovic without potentially playing a wild card, Tom?
I don't know who would do that, Lucy. Who would, despite being in the top 100K, play a wild card at this point? Couldn't be
You have
me.
to tell me.
It wouldn't be me. Anyway, but yes, no, absolutely. I think there's definitely a shifting tide when it comes to how managers are starting to kind of set up. But it was still something that was really kind of nagging at me last week. I didn't really have time to do much data to see if it is indeed true that the big at back this year has done especially poorly. Now, I didn't quite have the time because it was my first day, full day back at work today, um, to do kind of everything I wanted to. So I wanted to go over every defender, every goalkeeper, every midfielder, and every forward over the last 5 seasons and see what the picture looks like. What I've had to do instead is cheese it a bit, which is while still getting good enough picture, I'm going to basically look at the top 10 point scorers per position over the last 5 seasons after game week 6 to see if there is indeed a decline. I know it's a relatively small sample, so 200 players over 5 seasons versus doing every player. But I still imagine if we grossed it up to reflect the entire game, we'd see similar outputs. Maybe someone brighter than me can go off and check this afterwards. But yes, great in the stats, what we've seen is that the defense is indeed, after 6 weeks, having its worst results in the last 5 years. So 279 points have been scored by the top 10 defenders this year, which is just 10 more than the top 10 goalkeepers. And the midfielders on 369 and 90 points ahead of defenders, and forwards on 350 are 71 points out in front of defenders. And this is a huge drop off for the defense. It's a significant drop. So last year they scored 369 points, the same as the midfielders had this year. I mean, the defenders, as a the top 10 defenders at least, are down 90 points from where they were at this time last season. Looking back further into the last 5, this is cumulatively the worst defensive performance to open a season since 2019-20, when the top 10 defenders still open with 325 points. So they're still even further than the second worst performance thus far. In contrast, people looking at the forwards now, forwards are slightly better off this year than last year, 17 more points scored. But don't forget, there's fewer forwards accessible to us, and we have the second fewest available players in that position. Goalkeepers, obviously, there's very few. Um, and of course, as Lucy referenced, Haaland is the driving force of the forwards, 67 points. That's actually the fourth highest top positional scorer over the last 5 seasons. So Son and Kane in 2020-21 got 71 points, and Kun Aguero back in the day got 59 points. That being said, the forwards are still 40 points worse off than the average of the last 4 years. And overall, actually, we're seeing less points scored in FPL just because the points are being distributed everywhere. So the top 10s aren't doing particularly well in any position. Midfielders, by the way, relatively consistent. They always kind of get about 30% of the points scored or so in terms of the top 10s. But yeah, from this perspective, the defense has dropped off. They only scored 22% of the sum of the points scored by the 40 players in the sample, compared to an average of 24% over the last 4 seasons. So a little bit of a drop off, but in terms of the raw numbers, as I said earlier on, that huge drop, that huge difference, sorry, between defenders, midfielders, and forwards. Defenders had a torrid time of it this year, and using that measure, as I said, it's a bit of a shortcut because if I, in an ideal world, I'd have every player looked at here. The direction seems to be that big at the back hasn't worked this season or isn't working so far this season. I can't imagine that surprises you too much.
No, no, it doesn't. There's someone with double City defence, and there's someone who narrowly avoided double Liverpool defence. That doesn't surprise me at all. I think particularly those two defences have been the big shocks. I think in terms of I thought getting Edison as my goalkeeper was a pretty kind of reliable, easy way to points, and hasn't really worked at all. I think there's also, when we're thinking about three up top, there's also the disappointment, I guess, that comes with the 8 million midfield slot, which is potentially encouraging people to look at reinvesting funds. So you kind of got two factors there, I think. Diaz is probably the closest of those £8 million midfielders to come towards delivering anything kind of good, and you'd expect his spot to come under pressure from the returning Jota, especially given that Liverpool's current struggles are kind of persisting. So I think you've got two pressures there, that big at the back isn't really delivering, and that the slot that I think you and I hyped quite a lot actually pre-season, the one we thought would be full of riches, and in fact, one kind of infamous Twitter account has structured his entire team around 8 million man midfielders. The fact those two have both failed to deliver is putting that pressure, I think, on our teams and making us think about whether we're allocating funds in the best way. And then I think you've probably got a third factor in the sense that you've got someone like Fofana or fairly cheap Arsenal defenders, and dare I say it, Man United defenders, and the combination of Brighton and Newcastle doing all right so far defensively. that again makes you think, well, I could easily strip out some value out of this big at the back defense, not look too ropey at the back,
Yeah.
and reinvest.
I guess the pushback for some would be that you've got a very small sample size here, and you could hold and hope versus adapting and thriving. I mean, you're quite notably keen to follow the template as it is. I'm guessing you're kind of beginning to look at maybe moving on from the big at the back setup at the moment and adapting and thriving, or do you have any sympathy for that sort of hold and hope brigade who still think that having five big defenders could well work out in the long run?
I definitely have sympathy. I think there's a good reason why we all thought it was a good strategy at the beginning of the season, and I am one of those people that tends to think that 6 games isn't really much of a sample size to make any decisions on. But what I will say is, I think in a game where we haven't had a lot of decisions to make, and a game where you probably got a bit of transfer flexibility, you probably have huge numbers of fires to work with, which we often do at this stage of the season, then that kind of presents you more of an opportunity than you might already have. And then we've also got that factor that obviously with the World Cup being where it is, we've effectively got the extra wild card. So it's not like you're kind of committing for the very, very long term in the way that you were before. So if you have misjudged it and you need to do some restructuring, it's not like a massive issue. That said, I don't think restructure, and this is going to sound so bad given that you've played your wild card, I don't think restructuring for an extra forward is that difficult given the structure of most
No, it's
template
not.
teams. So if you're keen on this and you think you need a Mitrovic or a Tony, if you roll a transfer, you can probably do it in 2, and if you can't, you can probably do it in 3, and that's a hit. So it's not, a hit this season seems wild and
Yeah.
extraordinary, but really isn't that big a deal. And you can probably do it. So there isn't even a need to play your wild card if you don't want to. Although there is, as I'm sure you're going to explain, a lot of advantages to taking one now. But I mean, if you weren't, I think that there are ways to get there quite quickly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I explained last week, in terms of the two defenses or certain defenses in general just dropping off and creating this sort of question, it's very interesting. And you're right, that -4 as a side point is seen as kind of like, wow, that guy's really, or that girl, or that manager has really gone out on a limb here. And it kind of makes me remember, COVID-ridden Christmas a couple of years ago when -8 was the new rolling a transfer. Like, it's just amazing how these things change. And I suppose that kind of makes me think again about what I was writing in Talisman Theory a couple of seasons ago, that the forwards are absolutely awesome. Only for last season, the defenders just overtake and the forwards just to be nowhere. And I think that kind of maybe there's a lesson to be learned here about neutrality at the start of the season being probably for the best. And as I've said a few times, like planning for last season in the new campaign, maybe that's just not the way to go. There's not. I can see why, for example, big at the back was something that people followed up on. It was nice to see, obviously, because we pioneered it. But I still think it wasn't necessarily misjudgment. It's just the conditions haven't been right for it to flourish, especially with Liverpool, as I said on the pod last Thursday, being unexpectedly absolutely pants. So with that in mind, I think let's turn to how we can move beyond big at the back. And the forwards, as we've mentioned, are getting a lot of attention. I've got lots of questions on the personnel in question, Lucy, which I'm sure we'll reference later on. So in the Q&A they go. But for now, Lucy, I mean, is it 3-4-3 or is it a 4-3-3? Do you keep with that kind of the four defenders and have some vestige of the original meaning of big at the back? Or back to the proper old school of 3-4-3, shovel that money into the midfield and forward line and screw that defence?
Um, I don't really have a strong opinion either way. Which I know sounds a bit city on the fancy, so I will try and explain this. I think Gross and maybe Rashford and maybe would, well, like I, there aren't really a huge number of midfielders that are taking my fancy at a kind of 6 million-ish, 7 million-ish price point. Let's say 6 million for now. So it's quite difficult to pull that off, I think, on a wild card. And it feel quite balanced. So I think on a wild card, I'd be looking at 4-3-3. I think as we are now, so if you're working with a wild card and you can afford to reset your whole team, I think 3-4-3-3 is probably. Am I saying? I've got myself quite confused here. 3-4-3 um might
4-3-3, I think
be
you mean.
4-3-3 might be the way to go. I think if you are now, you may find that you've got a premium defender that you can easily downgrade to get the third striker, which I think a lot of people are in the situation, particularly if you've got someone like Robertson who's really gone off the boil. You can quickly shift funds between the defence and the front, and maybe 3-4-3 is easier to spin into at the moment. Um, I think 4-3-3 is probably a preferable, which is why you do it on a wild card. Because I think it gives you a bit more balance, it gives you a bit more kind of cheaper options, so that you don't have to kind of spend all of your money on your first 11. I think it probably gives you a bit more flexibility. So I think in an ideal world 4-3-3, but I think a lot of people will find that 3-4-3 is easier to execute on the fly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And it's just to talk about it for a second. It feels like I know memories are quite short in FPL. It's almost like a beautiful novelty to be looking at the forwards again, isn't it? It's like some sort of sunlit upland of opportunity, which is completely detached from last season. And as I referenced, it feels a bit of a throwback. It feels like very kind of old school FPL in a lot of ways. Before I got into that kind of the structure question, I just want to point out as well that the forwards, even though I just said all that, actually aren't as open as they appear to be. I mean, obviously we've only got 3 slots to play with, but in effect we've probably only got two, or arguably one, to differentiate with at the moment. Even if you're on wildcards like I am, I don't think you're going to be doing too much because Haaland isn't going anywhere, is he? And he's the most owned player now. Jesus just below him. Price drop this week, but two okay fixtures coming up: Everton and Brentford. I mean, we may see game week 9, 8 or 9, when people are starting to wildcard him, start to drop out of the at least the top 10k template a bit. Spurs, Liverpool, City are 3 of the 4 games between game weeks 9 and 12, which are obviously tricky assignments. But and we'll come on to them a little bit later. It does look like kind of those two plus someone like Mitro, Tony, Isaac, or the incumbent or if you are going to kind of mess around with Jesus, like I guess 2 of those 4 are the ones that we're kind of looking at the moment, which does remind me of the season with a couple of years back with Calvert Lewin, Bamford, all of these individuals who were of interest to us. Now, whether you go through or at the back at the moment, if you are just making transfers, I think it's probably easier just to kind of take down. I'm assuming most people have 4 rather than a 5. If you've got a 5, you probably go for 4-3-3. If you've got 4 plus a Neko, you probably take, as they said, one of the premiums down. And where I'm a wild card at the moment is still a 4-3-3, just about. It's actually a tougher choice than you'd think. That's because I need to decide if I ditch Trent. So I gave an answer to, I think it's FPL Kobeloy last Thursday night saying, don't wildcard. I've now completely 180'd and I've wildcarded myself. So really sorry, Kobeloy. I will explain that later, but I acknowledge that I've done it. But as
So
per that,
1 second, you just said no Trent because I physically gasped
no,
when
no,
you.
I don't think I'm going to do it.
Okay.
I've got Trent at the moment in the 4, but like basically, if right now there are 3 kind of defenders I really want, they are Reece James, Kieran Trippier, and a City defender of some description, probably Ruben Diaz. I'll speak about why it's not Cancelo in a bit. The 4th player I probably would want is Trent. No, so he's in the moment for me for Wolves right now. But I feel like, between game week 8 and 11, when people do wildcard in game week 8, Liverpool then have Chelsea, Brighton, Arsenal, and City. And given the state of that defence to the eye and also the data, it wouldn't surprise me if we see Trent as well begin to be sold off by people. And I think that that's kind of quite interesting to think about too, because if you don't have Trent and you've got kind of therefore a bit money to play around, then the players like our 8 million guys, the likes of Zaha, come into the discussion a bit more, and we kind of have an extra midfield slot effectively, which opens because you then kind of have your 3 defenders, your 4 defenders, or something like that. Especially you mentioned him earlier for Fana, a guy like that just coming in and being a great sort of bench sitter alongside Neko, and you've got a decent 3 at the back and Liverpool with tough fixtures. I can see it moving that way. I really can, just to kind of move to kind of 3 at the back and it going proper old school for a while, which would be quite nice. It would be like when your shuffle uh, takes on your favorite hit from the noughties. It happens every now and again. You're like, yeah, bang him. Bit of Slipknot, why not? I mean, it does happen, right?
Yeah, it does happen. I didn't even know what to say. The Slipknot reference just threw me completely.
There's a bit of duality about my character, put it that way.
I think I don't think there's a set way to do it. Mainly because we only have 6 games to judge on. But I would be reluctant to lose Trent just because I think he's one of those few players in the game that can do something ridiculous to you, and probably is because I've transferred him out a couple of times. He's immediately burnt me, so maybe I'm kind of scarred by my own experiences. But I feel like it doesn't take a lot for Trent to make you regret things, and I feel like if Trent gets into a decent run, then you're not going to find an £8 million midfielder that equals him.
Yeah.
So I'm not really prepared to give up on him yet. And if I was to wildcard in the next couple of weeks, as I suspect I will, I haven't really considered getting rid of him. Cancelo, I'm actually warmer on getting rid of, just because I think Diaz is a decent alternative. But yeah, Trent, I can't really get my head around that, and maybe it's me being stuck in the past, and maybe I need to update my views based on kind of the struggles of Liverpool so far. But I feel, we've heard that Thiago's coming back to fitness. I feel like they just can't carry on being this bad forever, can they?
No, I think the abiding principle as well, or big at the back, that there's great value in a player like Trent still holds true. Like, despite them having a bit of a dodgy start to the season, it's still probably true that 7.5, given what he can offer, Trent is probably better value than pretty much all the midfielders in kind of the mid price, mid to upper mid price, mid slots. Um, yeah, Cancelo is not in my wildcard team. And I think what was really interesting, yes, I know 6 game weeks, etc., etc., but he's still the top scoring defender. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, he's the top scoring defender at the moment. He's got such a bad, like, his data this season is dreadful. It really is. I
Yeah,
know.
I looked at his data. I didn't look at his score.
I know he's scored. Did a worldie, yeah, but his XGI is 0.5. That's the same as the likes of Tom Davies and Keenan Dewsbury Hall, and a few players who have double his XGI this year: Diego Dallo, Adam Armstrong, and Purvis Estupinian, which is an Italian or Spanish speaker's way of saying it's an opinion, by the way. And Estupinian has played just 170 minutes, which I guess, that tells the story, doesn't it? Really.
Well, I
I
mean,
mean,
so much of his positioning, if you look at him, he's kind of like a defensive midfielder, isn't he? It's not hugely surprising.
that's the thing. He's basically just part of the midfield three, and that midfield three isn't really. It's not really quite working, is it, at the moment for Cancelo? Maybe Pep's gonna be like, "Oh, got you one week," and then he'll be unleashed. So with Walker out, maybe him moving to the right will presage a change. But at the moment,
That is a that's quite a good point actually, which I hadn't considered. You've almost kind of talked yourself through that. Is that given that Walker didn't train today on Monday, the 5th of September, um, there is that potential that he has to move over to the right and they use the new guy at left back. Um, in which case he probably doesn't tuck in quite so naturally, and they might need to use him as a more traditional fullback, maybe.
Maybe it'll be interesting to see whether they unbalance the team, especially with the drawing to Aston Villa of all people. That's almost as bad as drawing to Everton, isn't it? But you know what I mean. I think that maybe I'll think about it a little bit more. I'm still I've been a bit concerned by Cancelo, especially by watching him. Apart from that worldie, there's been nothing about him which says £7 million worth in FPL. So, in summary, is it time to move away from big at the back? I mean, Lucy, it sounds like you're grasping at it, scrabbling, and hoping you can hold on to it. But it kind of sounds like you're kind of thinking, in the next few weeks, maybe in your wild card, it may be time to move some of those funds forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not hugely big at the back now because I've kind of slowly been downgrading such some great moves, such as Reece James to Dunk, which has gone so well that I've got 0 points from 2 weeks from Dunk. So thanks so much for that. But there are moves I've made that have slightly downgraded. So I think I've got 2 players that I paid 4.5 for and a 5 million. So I'm not quite so in the deep end as some people are. And I don't know if I'll downgrade that much there. I think if I want to go for a striker before a wild card, I'll probably use Diaz as a make weight because that's my easy bit of locked up money. I don't know if I'm ready to quit on Cancelo yet, but we'll see. I think a lot of my plans are going to revolve around what we see in the next week or so.
Fair enough. I think just in general, even though the sample size is small and some will definitely find that unsatisfactory, I still come back to this idea that each season having its own sort of element of individuality about it. And I think it's very important that we adapt and thrive with that season's character. So think about last year around this time, we started dumping the forwards pretty quickly. I mean, Antonio did stay for a while and probably stayed too long after the initial flurry. He was rubbish, wasn't he? And we should have just gone down to Kane plus two duds very quickly. But I completely understand people are sounding that sort of patience gong. And there's definitely a question around using what we've got now to predict the future. But that's an academic question to me, I think. Like, we need to, I guess, make judgments to maximize our points yield as FPL managers. And you've got, for me, you've always got to move with the times. And much like how we dropped the forwards last season, as I said, I feel like people will begin to come away from it in the next couple of weeks. Maybe we'll see the defenders next weekend completely poo all over me. But I just feel like there's opportunities elsewhere now, which is what's really interesting. It's just, and we'll speak about the players in the Q&A, where you go with it and how you kind of work that in. But yeah, no, definitely, I think the data seems very, very vocally to be pushing us, you, me, us in that direction. I think it'll just be interesting to see how that works out. And you'll get a case study of how it works out with seeing how I do with my wildcard, which we'll discuss in the second section alongside all the other bits in just a sec. Right, we're back, and it's the second half of the pods, starting with the game reviews. How did we do this week? Well, I can reveal exclusively that it was a terrible week, as it was for probably most of you listening, and we also drew. So I think we're pretty close, aren't we, Lucy, in terms of points? I think last week I just about edged in front, didn't I?
You did. You got 90 and I only got 83. So you've opened up a huge 7 point gap.
Oh, to be completely destroyed this week by the players that I've sold, I'm sure. How did you get on this week?
I got a miserable 39, although not as miserable as some of the scores I saw out there. I think if you had a template team, basically you didn't do very well. My notes here asked me to identify what went well. Um, not a lot. I got the captaincy call correct with Mr. Harlan's 9 pointer, and my transfer gross in for the injured Lavia delivered an assist. How I managed to get just one assist from 5 goals from Brighton, I'll never know, but there we are. The rest of the team was a total train wreck, as I think it was, as I said, for everyone. My two recent defensive transfers, which I touched on earlier, Cucurella and Dunk, have been a total disaster, and Double City defence isn't really paying off, having been our early season differential.
Hmm.
Really isn't a lot of point to it now. So, yes, how about you, Tom?
Yep, 39 for me as well. Feast of famine after a massive 90 pointer last week, as I said. So, I mean, Reece James dropped on Saturday morning. Thank you, robots everywhere. So I was able to transfer him straight back in for Cucurella rather than the Aronson to Gibbs White move that I mooted on the Thursday night pod. And that's another decision that's left me down a tad. I mean, obviously, that can't really grumble. I'm just inside top 100k at the moment. But I'd have another 3 more points if I bought Gibbs White in and James hadn't dropped. So yeah, I mean the same as you, only returners this week. Haaland captain and Neco Williams with an FPL assist. That was it. And Trent obviously being subbed off in the 59th minute. I think that just summed up the week, I think, for most people. I know he's highly owned, but that's it, really, isn't it? So yeah, I mean, not a disaster. Shouldn't panic after that. Shouldn't wildcard, but I have. And I will speak about that in just a little bit. Next thing, let's move on to the Min League update. The Min League code is JUXXE, or as Danny Lyons would say, just use triple X, stupid. Just use triple X, easy. And I just want to just quickly reference that poor old Tajiri Mayoron, who was top last week, is now down to 37th after a disappointing 33. So it just shows one bad week at the moment is enough to put you in a bit of a spin. But I'm sure he'll recover, that's for sure. It does mean we've got a new leader. who is Bryce Liare. I'm really sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Divi Dendino United, 73 points this week for Bryce.
Wow.
Ridiculous. He and Jonathan Treadaway in second with Darwinian selection, both 73. Jonathan on his wild card as well. And the key for them was that they were both Tony owners and both had Pope in goal. So very, very good weeks for them with 73. And that is by far probably the highest score in the mini league. In third, David Dart up from sixth, one of those many people last week who had joined sixth. 52 points for David, a team with no name. He's joined equal third. Jonathan Arkless up from seventh. Robin Hill it was his team. In fifth, Ed Straw up from 98th to fifth. What a jump that is. Just off a 62 pointer this week. I am a football team. Imaginative name there for Ed. In sixth up from 55th, it's Tom M, Kinder and Buemo. I think that might be Tom Med, actually, a dummy Tom. So well done, Tom. 58 points for him. I'm sure he had Tony. That's for damn sure. He said it. It's seventh, joint seventh, that is. It's Dan Ingus Den Haug of Den Haug United and Eugene Amoa G with Jenny Prick back again, 56 and 59 for those two, respectively. And equal ninth with Haven't Jot a Clue, Andy Mayheggy. Last week he was joint second, 44 this week. And all the way up from 27th, Joseph Wickoff with Pedence Potables, another 52 for him, takes him into the top 10. Well done, everybody. Market forces, worth having a quick look at just because we are a little bit. Normally, we record just after the games are finished, but we've had a day now. And it's really interesting. You can see the template hardening, Lucy. You really can. The likes of Trippier, Tony, and being brought in. I think it's about 160, 170,000 managers when I checked those two. I've just written the names Trippier and Tony here. I think Gross is still being brought in as well after his mini KDB performance of only getting an assist in a 5-2 win. Nick Pope, over 100,000 transfers in for him. I mean, definitely a lot of movement there. I think it's just because of that horrible injury to Edouard Mendy. People are just they're going elsewhere now because
Well, logical route is a Mendy owner, isn't it?
is he going to recover? That's the question we've got to ask ourselves. I mean,
6 weeks out.
Bowen literally kicked a hole in him, and it's just disgraceful. I'm surprised Bowen wasn't banned forever, like Pickford should have been after assaulting Van Dijk. So I mean, Pope 103,000 transfers in, and Martinelli rounding off top five. I said this last week with Haaland as well, when there were 500,000 managers buying Haaland. Maybe to a lesser extent, Martinelli 100,000 managers, but I mean, if you got to this point, Lucy, and you didn't have a Haaland or you didn't have a Martinelli or something like that, would you still be thinking, "Oh, I'm going to bring this guy in," or would it be the case that you feel like that you've missed the boat? Maybe not quite as true with Haaland actually, because you'd
Yeah, I was
always buy
about to
him. But
say, yeah, I'd have Haaland. I'd bring Haaland in if I didn't have him, just because he's, he looks like he could have, if not perma captain potential, then close to it. So if you just sit there with your fingers stuck in your ears, you're probably gonna lose out there. Yeah, someone like Martinelli, given that his fixtures are turning, and there are other potential options opening up if you like your Gross or your Rashfords. It's not like a compulsory thing to have Martinelli. So yeah, maybe if I didn't have him at this point, I probably wouldn't have him. There are a few others that potentially, I think, given that we're seeing this fixture turn, kind of game week 9-ish, there are probably some others that are being leapt on that probably shouldn't be leapt on. Newcastle, by contrast, probably you're ahead of a curve if you get big on those, given that their fixtures are improving so significantly quite shortly. So yes, I can see some of the why some of those are happening, and not so convinced on others.
music to my ears with Trippier and Pope, the Newcastle double up, the new City double up. I'll explain that later. And being sold, not particularly surprising. Rodrigo with the shoulder knack, I think he'll be out for another 4 weeks, something like that. Probably
I
post
did like
international
that our
break.
friend Harry told himself that it had been popped in, so it would be fine.
Oh, Harry, keep doing you. 171,000 sales for Rodrigo, and I'm assuming that's where the gross buyers are coming in, and maybe the Martinelli ones as well. Salah has been sold by 145,000 managers. I'm hoping that I can sell him for 13 and get him back for 12.9, give me 0.1. We shall see. I doubt it's going to happen.
Disgusting.
Trent as well, over 100,000 sales for him. People getting to Trippier. So I mean, it's happening. You can see it. It's just kind of how that does shake out. Perisic as well, nearly 100,000 transfers out for him, and Mendy, as I mentioned earlier on. Jesus also is the top sold forward at the moment. So, but he did drop on. I think it was last night, and I think that those people are going to Tony with him after that hat trick. So you can see this sort of new template beginning to form. If you look at the market forces, that's for sure. There's some reactionary stuff potentially, but also you can kind of see why these players are beginning to become of interest to people. Although I'm still intrigued to see that, for example, Gross is being brought in. I think it's this one. It's this one of those, isn't it, where he's just having a very, very good start to the season. It's one of those as well, where if you did kind of get on him very early, wow, you've made hay from that. That's for sure. Right, let's move on to the Q&A this week. Quite a few questions. Thank you very much. I normally shove these on at 10 a.m. on Monday to really catch the crowd. And as it is going mild, I tend to grab exactly what I need. So thanks very much if you did catch this. Mark, FPL positivity to start with. We kind of touched on this earlier on. He asked, looking at stats and fixtures up to game week 16, who sits alongside Haaland as the key strikers out of Mitro, Tony, Jesus, and Isaac, who has come onto the scene for many people? But Lucy, what do you think here? Would you be keeping Jesus if you were wildcarding now? That's probably the first a good starting point.
Yeah, Jesus is one of those ones I had a kind of like last risk by. If I was wildcarding now, I would be tempted to get rid. Um, Ideally though, I'd be wanting to wait a little bit longer. Their fixtures turn soon, but not soon enough if you're wildcarding right now. Um, so yeah, hate to loop back on myself. Maybe actually you keep him on a wild card and get rid of him in a few weeks. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think his time's come yet. And the reason I say that is because A, the fixture's still all right. B, he's posting really good stats. I think his NPXGI per 90 is the only person he's second to is Haaland. So he's doing pretty good from that perspective. If you don't mind the small sample size there, and of course I hate to bring up the spectre of ownership, but he is very highly owned, as we've just touched on. So if you bet against him and you get it wrong, it's going to be quite painful. So at the moment, I would have Jesus in. Very soon, you might be tempted to gamble against him. And I think the other person I'd be looking at is Mitrovic, just because he is posting great stats and he's doing it at a really affordable level at the moment. Obviously, that's going up, but given his value he represents, he would be my other lock in. And then you could use that Jesus spot for Tony or Isaac or whoever you fancy in a few weeks. Would be probably how I play it anyway.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, Isaac, I don't know how you pronounce that. I need to look that up.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I was calling it. I don't know if Isaac's right.
Isaac, I don't know. But you know who I'm talking about. We will sort
The
that out next
Newcastle
week.
forward.
The Newcastle forwards, who isn't Callum Wilson nor Chris Wood. He's an unknown punt, isn't he? But okay numbers in Spain with Real Sociedad, an average of 0.55 XGI per 90 with them over the last 3 years, which is pretty good. A quieter campaign in terms of output last year, so just 6 goals. He was expected to score 11 though, so a bit of an underperformance, and that's pretty impressive actually. I say that, but then when Vogt Weghorst joined the Premier League, I was citing his numbers at Wolfsburg, which are very similar. So we don't know, but to the eye over the last couple of games, he's looked pretty impressive, hasn't he? And as you referenced earlier, Newcastle fixtures looking very decent too. So it could definitely be an uber differential at that 4% ownership. In terms of the more settled players, what I like about them is that they're talisman, all of them. Mitrovic, Tony, and Jesus, I think still probably would be in the conversation, at least for Arsenal, in terms of being the talisman. See how that goes. Lots of ways to look at that. Non-pen XGI is probably the best, as Lucy's referenced already. All in the top 10 for that this season. Jesus top currently, and very impressive 0.92 XGI per 90 thus far this season, that's really good. Third overall. And Arsenal fixtures are stiffening though. Spurs, Liverpool, City, all to come very, very soon. So maybe we'll see those impressive numbers tail off. And in fifth, Ivan Tony with 3.7 XGI. Shades Mitro's not 3.5, but it's really close between the two of them. It really is. What's really interesting, though, is noting that Tony's XGI is fueled by an impressive XA. So his expected assist is 1.9 versus Mitro. It's just all about the non-pen XG. So his is 3.2. That's the fourth highest in the Premier League behind Jesus, Kane, and Haaland. So both owned by a similar amount of managers, so the spectre of ownership can be binned off. And I think it's really interesting to kind of figure out whether you want the out and out focal point goal scorer in Tony or the more complete forward in out and out goal scorer in Mitro or the complete goal scorer in the complete forward in Tony. The fixtures are pretty similar as well. So Fulham have got Chelsea, Forest, Newcastle, West Ham, Bournemouth, and Aston Villa, whereas Brentford have got Southampton, Arsenal, Bournemouth, Newcastle, Brighton, and Chelsea. I think it's marginally better for Fulham, and the fixture ticker on Fantasy Football Hub agrees with me. But it's a case of take your pick, really. I completely agree with what you're saying about Jesus. He's not leaving my team for the moment. I think he probably will in a couple of weeks, and I'll probably pick up the other one that I don't pick up of Tony and Isaac, depending on who's doing better. But I've got Tony. I've got Mitrovic on the wild card, but I could end up with him plus one of Tony or Isaac very very easily, and no Jesus eventually. That's for sure. Yeah, very interesting. And it's really a case of just figuring out the character that you want. I think more routes to points with Tony could be a clincher for some people. Having a system which seems to be designed to serve Mitrovic is something that I really like. Because at the end of the day, the goals is well, really where it's at, both on penalties as well. But Tony's penalty taking and free kick taking, as you saw this weekend, are both pretty damn good. Next question, data sample size again. So friend of the pod, Adam Pritchard, who's Sexden I was actually at on Saturday. So I watched some games with him up in North London. He asks, do we have enough of a sample size, citing stats in the eye test now, to validate concerns around underperforming premiums? And does that mean we can identify some breakout stars who wouldn't have been our thoughts otherwise? And does it basically mean that Salah is a crock of excrement? I mean, Lucy, you've got some thoughts here on Salah, I believe. I mean, what do you think about all of this? Is it the case that the stats are now pointing us elsewhere?
Well, I've seen quite a lot of frankly ridiculous takes on Salah this week, and I feel like I just have to have a little rant about this, just because it marries in quite well into what Adam's been asking. Um, in answer to his first question, do we have a large enough sample size? I don't know if we have one to make very kind of graded decisions between players. So if they're quite close on stats, you don't have a huge sample size to say, well, that decimal point makes a difference there, or this number of touches makes a difference there. But I do think it's enough now to kind of make broad statements about a direction of a player and whether they're offering value. Which brings me on to Salah. I think it's quite clear that Liverpool aren't where you'd expect them to be, and they have issues. And I think that's particularly true in midfield, given that we've seen Artur come in on loan, and a few discussions about what the direction of their midfield might be. And obviously, we've seen both Trent and Robertson see early subs and rests, which also kind of points to the key creators in their team having problems. But I do think some of the reaction around Salah himself and him as an FPL option are kind of quite hyperbolic and a little bit insane. I think it's partly because he's not keeping track with Haaland, obviously, who's absolutely smashing goals in. And it's partly because people are frustrated with having money tied up in him. But we know that it's likely that Haaland won't be able to play every game, and therefore you need another premium to take that captaincy armband when it's needed. And having looked at his non-pen XG I per 90, it's still well over 0.7, which is within his usual ballpark, although not to the heights of last season, but it was pretty consistent with the previous 2 seasons. People are talking about general width during attacks, so that he looks a little bit wider than he normally is, but heat maps don't really show a lot of that. I know The Athletic also kind of dug into whether that was true, whether his touches were changing or moving. Their headline analysis suggested there'd been a 5% increase in his shots from the right channel, his touches in the right channel. I looked into it. Again, you're looking at a 6-game sample size, so 5% probably isn't that statistically significant. And having dug into their own little map that they made, he's actually getting more touches in the centre of the penalty box, which they kind of sketched over because I didn't think it fitted their agenda on that one. So there's lots of evidence right now that he's not quite so bad as people make out. I think a big influence is that he hasn't seen like a heap of penalties. I think if you'd seen penalties and he supplied points, people wouldn't have worried about it as much. So I just think people need to be a little bit patient with Salah at the moment. There's not really another premium of that ilk demanding you buy them right now. I mean, Kane's making the best case probably, and even then he's not he's not jumping out to such an extent. So given that we know that there are other forward options, so you probably wouldn't want to go down that route. I just think there's plenty of a case to just hold off on kind of jumping to conclusions on Salah. I think he's a great captaincy option this week, and people need to just chill out a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I've still got Salah in my wild cards as a squad player. That probably is what, and like the prime vice captain asset. I think that probably, if you said that any other season, would sound preposterous and probably speaks to that kind of discomfort I think that you reference. But I still kind of, I'm not able to fit in Kane at the moment in the forward slots because, as we said, they're so congested. I could go with KDB there, but again, I'm not sure, especially with the midweeks. And I guess it goes back to what I said last week about not being sure about other players in the premium bracket. I'm not sure about Sterling yet. I'm not sure about Bruno Fernandes yet. I'm not sure about X, Y, and Z yet. And there's so much credit in the bank where Salah is concerned. To credit in the blank, Freudian slip. And I just share your cynicism on statements about his demise as well. Like I've still got faith in him to some extent. I know there's tough fixtures coming up, but I mean, I can probably see why you'd be removing Trent because you're losing that sort of clean sheet ability. But with Salah, I mean, he doesn't do too badly in the big games, does he? Uh, yeah. And it's just because there's no one really putting their hand up conclusively to replace him at the moment. There's that legacy of love I've got for Mo, which makes me think I'll give him more time, hopefully have him for 12.9. And the other point I'd make is that I'm sure Klopp and the Liverpool team would have realised that you've got your one of your kind of key threats currently not really uh, getting the outcomes that his data or his positioning might deserve. So I wouldn't be surprised to see there being a re-engineering of the approach at the moment. But it is obviously concerning that the one moment of real threat was that late big chance on Saturday, and otherwise it wasn't really there for him, was it, in that game? And with Nunez taking the majority of the shots. And the one I'd really like to sort his life out is Son. I don't think anyone would have predicted at this point in the season he'd just be sat with, I think it's one assist, isn't it? But
Oh,
yeah,
is it zeros?
no,
Is it one?
we got one assist on the first game week. Yeah,
Oh, okay. It was so long
yeah.
ago. I forgot it even
I
happened.
know, I know. There's a few proper, straight at the keeper sort of shots as well. Where
Yeah.
last season you'd have backed him to score them, but I think he's one of these, isn't he? That he just, I know we don't like to. I don't really like to use the term inform or, but I think he does that confidence he needs from just the ball hitting the back of the net one time. I think that will be kind of a bit of a starting klaxon for me when I start to think, oh, hang on a minute. Like I can't back him at the moment. If Man City next, I'm not too concerned about that. I think there'll be loads of goals in that game this weekend, but I can't quite back him yet, just on what I've seen. But if he does start to score, I think that would be the moment where maybe selling Mo does start to come onto the table. I mean, Spurs' fixtures, yeah, they're not great, but they're okay especially compared to Liverpool's on paper. And you could create a flimsy pretext for yourself for selling Salah if you just think, oh, okay, well, Spurs have got Leicester in game week 8, the North London derby in game week 9, Brighton, Everton, United, Newcastle, Bournemouth up until game week 14. That's none of that's particularly bad. None of that would particularly worry me. So I mean that would probably be the way that I go. But at the moment, got Salah. He's the vice captain, and I can see why that's going to make people think, oh yeah, I don't really want him, but I just don't. I'm not really too sure where you go. I'm not sure yet. And maybe you have the money in your bank and just kind of just distribute it outwardly, which I was thinking about, but maybe not quite this week. Next question. Michael Lowe says Robbo has been drinking in the last chance saloon for a while. Wow, you got the patience of a saint, Michael. You really have if you've still got him. But he asked, should he be allowed to stay for last orders with Wolves home next? And he says, Lucy, can you tell us if Wolves were any good, or is it a case of quote unquote just saints doing saints things? So, I mean, what do you think about that one, Lucy?
I don't even know what he means by saints doing saints things. I couldn't possibly understand. I mean, I did put on my notes where he'd said that Robbo being in the last chance saloon was the case. I feel like at this point Robbo's locked himself into your team. Like it's after shutting and he's still in there somehow. I don't know how you still got him, but well done. I don't know if it's a well done or Oh dear. But well done. We'll go with well done. I think if you've held him to this stage and you've only got one free transfer, I would keep going. I know it sounds mental, but on the showing I saw this weekend against Saints, Wolves were their kind of typically steady selves. I didn't see them creating loads of chances. They know that they have a striker problem. Unfortunately, Cesar Kladzic picked up an ACL injury in his first 45 minutes, so he isn't going to provide the solution.
Diego Costa might.
Oh, you did take my real that was my punchline there. Diego Costa is apparently in talks with Wolves, and I think that probably shows you how seems mean but desperate they are for a centre forward who can provide them with a bit of cutting edge, because that's the area where they really struggle. I think they'll be quite challenging for Liverpool in a midfield from a midfield perspective, because I think they've got a lot of quality there with Neves, Moutinho, and Nunez. But I don't think they're at a point yet where you need to worry about them from a if you own defensive assets against them. So if you've only got one free transfer, I probably would just leave Robbo where he is. If you've got two, that's where I'd be more tempted to use Robbo as the make
Yeah.
weight for a forward. But I'm not sure that would be worth a hit. So that's why I'm saying you'd need the two transfers in the bank for that. Yeah, if you're a bit limited on your flexibility, I'd probably stick.
Yeah, I agree. I think the drop off for Robbo has been pretty significant, unfortunately, and the five sub rule means that he and Shimikas, so he's got a natural sort of replacement in a lot of games. Indeed, Shimikas started this week. Means that I'm not at all convinced he's going to be in our plans as often this season as he was in previous years. But broadly, I agree. A lot of it comes down to the later plans, like are you manoeuvring to a wild card the next week or so? And if so, I mean, you probably want to roll that free transfer this week and punt it out with two final dead end sort of 1 week punters next week, right? I mean, give it the Wolves game, as Lucy said, they're struggling to score. Hope you get that double clean sheet payoff. Kiss him goodbye next week. Seriously, incredible patience. I really
Yeah,
admire
I
you.
mean, Wolves only really scored because Bazunu dived the wrong way and got confused by a Podence kick into the ground. Otherwise, I didn't think they'd have scored. And if you're not scoring against Southampton, are you scoring against Liverpool? I don't think so. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, I suppose this marries on next to the next question quite nicely. Um, FPL Inzi asks, who would be your best 1 week punts per position for those wildcarding in game week 8? So they need a 1 week punt.
Well,
Tom,
I'm
what?
assuming I don't mean you don't mean the goalkeepers, so I'm going to leave that
Yeah,
one.
I haven't got any ideas for that one. Good luck with that one.
Nothing. So defenders, I'd actually be looking at the Wanner, like just I mean, I know that you probably, if you could look at like, a player who can come in and grab you an assist or something. But for me, I kind of actually be looking at Gabriel Magalhaes, who I've just sold actually. So, you've got even more chance of him actually scoring now. He's got the best XG amongst defenders. So maybe give him a go. Everton this week as well. That could be one to go with. Difficult amongst the defenders because unless you kind of, I'm not sure Trippier counts as a punt, but probably one of the
And
best
also, that's not
all-round
a great
attacking
fixture
players.
for him, though, is it either?
No, it's not fantastic, is it? West Ham have been on and off this year.
Like that wouldn't put me off buying him for a long-term thing, but if you're literally looking to maximize your points production off one transfer, that I probably wouldn't put him in the conversation.
Yeah, maybe Estepinian at Brighton if would probably be the one that I'd be looking at. Maybe Dunk on the same level of could do a goal.
Yeah,
Um,
I think Brighton and Arsenal are the two defenses I'd be looking at if you're looking for a defensive punt. But I think if I was doing a 1 week punt, I probably wouldn't look at defense. I don't think there's that many obvious ones for this week. I'd probably be looking further up the field. I mean, on current showing, Forest are a poor defence. I don't think there's much debate about that. So I'd be looking at some kind of Leeds attacker probably. It would be great if Bamford's fit, because I think he would be a really nice random low percentage punt. Again, you'd need to wait for news on that one. The other one I did note down is Leicester Villa, which seems like a really interesting match just because both teams have ability. We know they do. They're both just looking a bit rubbish. So I think that could have goals in it, in which case you could look at, say, James Maddison, for example, Tom.
yep, or Daka up front. Got a goal and assist this
I
week.
was giving you a little in there for
I,
explaining why you got James Madison in any draft of your
I,
wild card.
I haven't though. That's the thing.
Oh, have you gone back on that one
But
then?
I do like Madison a lot. I think that there's I'll speak about him in a moment. But I think that he's one who will hopefully be benefiting from a new manager mounts very soon. That's for sure. I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, if Villa do win that. I think in my predictions game I've got Villa winning it, and hopefully that. Hopefully sounds a bit horrible, but maybe that being the end of Brendan Rodgers. Not that I've got anything against Rodgers, but I'd like Maddison to have a new manager bounce and Leicester to be resurgent because their fixtures are very good coming up. And give you on Bamford, wrote him down. I also wrote Sinistera at Leeds down.
Yeah, I had him down. Yeah.
How is he 6.5? It's one of those things that I didn't realize until I started looking at a wild card. It was just the XGI for Forest, though. XGA for Forest is absolutely ridiculous. 2.22 goals per 90. That is unbelievable, especially given the amount of signings they've made.
But
So
that might be the problem, to be fair.
maybe. And the other one up front, perhaps Inzi, would be Punt and Welbeck against Bournemouth. I mean, it's really kind of in that sort of level, isn't it? Those sort of 1% players that no one's ever going to be thinking of. Yeah, no, a few there. Next question, we've kind of started talking about this a little bit earlier on, but Jay Mera asks, are there any 8 million midfielder differentials worthy of our consideration? So, as we said in pre-season, we were very excited about this category, but for all its fanfare, this category has been absolutely diabolical, hasn't it? And we haven't had the output we expected from the likes of Saka and Mount. There are two in mind for me looking at the fixtures. If you treat things objectively rather than kind of saying he's done nothing this season so far, well, all it will take is a good performance or two from a player like this, and suddenly everybody owns them. And yeah, Lucy tried to give me the assist earlier. I'm going to turn in the rebound and just say Madison is number one that I've been looking at. The Leicester do look absolutely rancid, but there are a few very good fixtures coming up. And other than the Spurs game in game week 8, they don't play another top 16 from last year up until game week 14, which is the Man City game. So a really ideal sort of spate of fixtures for them to turn things around. And hopefully there may be a new manager bounce to feed off soon. So yeah, Madison would be one, a talisman for his team. The other one, another talisman for his team, is Jared Bowen, 8.1. So between now and the mid-season break, West Ham only play Liverpool and United in the top six in the next 10 game weeks, which is pretty good. I know that West Ham haven't come to life at all thus far. He has looked better to the eye, not that that's translated into the underlying stats at all. Blanked in every single game this season, but another one. If he does start to do okay, performance against Newcastle this week, for example, in game week 7, suddenly you've got a game against Everton away in game week 8, which he could really get his teeth into. But he's actually featured in a couple of my wildcard drafts, actually, more than Madison, just because it's one of those sort of uber differentials at 2.4%. But I think actually, what I do here is plump for Zaha, if I
Yeah,
was kind of thinking that.
that's my answer. To
Yeah.
not answer the question and just pick a completely different player that isn't from the category requested.
Well, I mean, he kind of is.
Well, it gives you spending money, doesn't it, for elsewhere? I think Zaha is the best option amongst all of those. And Madison was the only one I noted down, but looking statistically at him, his non-pen XGI is just terrible. I know we're saying that there's likely to be a managerial change, but it is just so diabolically bad that
Yep.
I cannot recommend him at the moment. So yeah, I had Zaha as the answer, and you could just use some nice money. I can't think that there's some kind of compulsory element where you have to spend all of it. So that would be my recommendation.
Cool. All right. Final question to me. Joshua at What the Big C. Tom, is your wild card to chase upsides because you feel like your squad has a flaw? As its template, hashtag BeigeFC. Do you feel like more people should be on the wild card? Or either way, he says, I hope it pays off for you. Let's do it then. So yeah, I wildcarded. Why? Well, what makes this year different? Lucy's arched her eyebrows. She's leaning in.
Is the answer not stout? I thought the answer was stout.
Yeah, the answer was that I was absolutely blottoed on Sunday. No, I think what makes this year different to the prior ones is that it was always going to be, for me, I've been saying this as well consistently. I can point to every pod where I've cited Praz saying about the low bar to wildcard and such, etc. That the wildcard this season in the first bit was always going to be about optimization rather than wholesale change, I think. And I've seen a couple of threads as well on teams to target going forward. And when things like Aston Villa and Bournemouth players being part of your wild card gets mentioned, I think, oh God. But basically, yeah, I've maintained throughout the preseason that there's a low bar to wild card in this season. And I guess it was just when I spotted there to be an advantage, I kind of thought, yeah, I'll go for it. And I can't underline it enough. It takes different form to most years. Most years we take drastic action in the early wild card. We sell the Sons, we sell the Canes, and completely kind of reorganize for what's coming up. This wild card is a very sort of incremental, changey one to basically allow me to get ahead of the game in some places, hopefully, and tidy up in others. There's no great change here. And some may say that I shouldn't have wildcarded then. I completely understand that. Believe me, I do, because I've heard the same defense given by other people. I've been sat there kind of thinking, oh my Lord, what have they done? But I have said it all year. Come on. That it's going to be about those sort of small changes. So yeah, it boils down to a couple of reasons, I guess. Low bar to wildcards. And also I'm hoping that because I'm in the top 100k, I'm doing something quite unique for me, which is you wildcarding from a position of relative strength. So in the past, I've had to do that drastic change and hoping to try to catch up. As it is, I'm not very far away from something pretty decent. I haven't thrown the baby out the bathwater. There are only incremental changes I've made, but they were sufficient enough for me to think, you know what, I'm going to optimize myself a bit. And hopefully, the gamble is that I'm on the next template before everybody else gets there in a couple of weeks. Obviously, that's the gamble, and it could absolutely go belly up. That's really flimsy, isn't it? But yeah, I've been speaking to a few guys like Nick Maynard and my friend Chris, and I genuinely I didn't put it on the Saturday night, even though I was really considering it. And I think on Sunday I was thinking, oh, I really want to go for it. And I think that's kind of what pushed me over the edge. Like with wildcards, it's always one of those things where it's very individual. You can kind of go, oh yeah, I'm wildcarding because everyone else is, because Ben Crellin's told me to. But with this sort of thing, I always quite like to just kind of go for it and kind of try to make the most of that opportunity if you see one.
Mine's
Um,
normally, oh yes, I'll play it now because I should have done it last week.
Yeah, I could feel that brewing. That's the thing. I could feel that brewing, even though, yeah, I could have just sold Cancelo for a four and brought in Mitrovic, or I could have sold Diaz for someone and brought in Mitrovic. I still felt that there were quite a few kind of places in the team. I just wanted to just kind of have a little bit of a refresh. So it really is to go to Joshua's question. It is about chasing upsides to some extent. It's not about thinking my squad had too much of a floor, and I certainly don't think everyone else should wildcard too. I think it's just, I feel like it is very individual. I think that we definitely, it's a byproduct of how saturated FPL world is that most people will wildcard when everyone else is, and there's a feeling that that's the right thing to do. Maybe it will turn out to be the right thing to do. You never know. But my idea was always that, right, post transfer window, if there's an opportunity to optimize a little bit, then I'll take that opportunity, and that's kind of what I've done. Yeah, that's kind of that question.
I mean, it's not that out there, is there? Is it? I mean, you're going in game week 7. A few people go in game week 8, and a lot of people go in game week 9. Like, it's not like you've gone
No, no, not at all.
weeks and weeks ahead, and it could pay off. And if it doesn't pay off, you're not like miles away from it. I don't think. I think what you're aiming for is what a lot of people will be aiming for in 2 weeks' time. So it'll all converge eventually. I think it's just a question of in those 2 weeks, do you get the benefit of it or do you fall behind? We don't know at this point.
That's the thing. It's just kind of projects where things are going to go, and that's why players like Madison or players like Bowen, who aren't in my team at the moment, because I've still, so I don't want to throw the baby out the bathwater. I've still got Trent. I've still got Salah, because of the Wolves game and because of the practical ownership side of it, which unfortunately is a factor. But it's still, one of those things that I feel quite happy with it. I mean, just to, we're moving into transfers and captains now, but just to kind of say where I am to some extent. So I've got Pope in goal. Ward stayed. Um, I just got double Newcastle defence, I said earlier on, which I don't mind at all. No, my friend FPL Libero said to me that if you take out their City Liverpool games, which is never best practice, of course, but their XGA is basically halved. So more than half of their expected goals conceded was against, unsurprising, those two clubs. Overall, they've actually been quite good. And in terms of those players individually as well, Trippier, set piece monopoly, bonus point generation, free kicks, and Pope saves. He's made the most in the Premier League at the moment. think that kind of makes both of them okay to be paired together on an individual basis. And plus, if they get a clean sheet, that's good because the fixtures are getting better. He says, trying to convince himself. Uh, as I mentioned earlier, James and then one City player comprise the musts in the defence. So alongside Trippier, so I've got Diaz at the moment for ostensible nailedness. I don't know whether I'll stick with that, but he looks like kind of the best of that bunch. So he becomes like the proxy Edison. So I don't have Cancelo right now. I think I'm gonna have. I think I will sit on him. So it looks like he's gonna rise soon. But I don't really have him in my plans at the moment. So that's the four at the back. And then you've got kind of, like a Webster or a Fafana character. Probably Webster because I'm happier to play him in a lot of weeks just because he's a 90-minute hero at 4.5. That's where we're going. That's where we're going. In midfield, Salah stays. Preseason talisman hero pick, Trossard comes in. I just really like the guy. And I think I was watching the
You did
Brighton Leicester.
briefly just say I've always fancied him, didn't you?
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah. I just love frozen tips. But yeah, I mean, I was watching the Brighton Leicester game with the intent to be scouting Madison, and actually, first half whatever, but the second half, how Trossard was utilised in that, I was just like, yeah, I really want to get this guy in. Martinelli stays, Andreas stays. I've got like a 4.4 third bench or something, and up front, Haaland and Jesus stay, and Mitro is new. So I've all carded to make 7 or 8 changes. I've optimized it a little bit, and the only decision really is whether I maybe go without Trent and get someone like Zaha, Bowen, or Madison. But I think that that's probably going to be Trent realistically. I don't want to throw the baby out the bathwater, as I've said several times. And it's just unusual, Lucy. It's really unusual. Like, I've never wildcarded from this position of strength in inverted commas before. But as I said, I just felt like it was the time. And whether I've judged that right or wrong depends to be seen. As you said, I'm not too far out from anyone else will. I'm just hoping that there's a bit of advantage to be had there in getting players who you'll want anyway in game week 8 or 9, like getting them in now without losing too much. I mean, the big loss for me is probably Diaz. So I mean, it's very sort of like I've optimized. I've got one risk, and I'm sure I'll be at FPL meets this Saturday. I'm sure that he'll score, and I'll be kind of outside, drowning my sorrows with several beers. But hey, I mean, it's kind of I'm quite happy with the decision. I feel like some wildcards you are kind of I come on here and I go, oh, I regret doing it. I was just drunk, or I was just kind of I was really panicking, but. No, I did think it would kind of be coming fairly soon. It was just kind of one of those things that kind of after the game week, I thought, oh, I can see how the things are going to go after watching the football this week and watching it last week. And I just thought, yeah, okay, I'll go for it.
Excellent. So my team's not anywhere near as exciting because I don't have a wild card. Um, my captaincy really depends on the Champions League and what we see there. If Haaland's rested or plays limited minutes, that makes it pretty straightforward for me. If he doesn't, which is what I would expect, then it's a bit tighter. And then I'm probably looking at the hive mind predictions for confidence about his minutes at that point. Um, if those were okay, I'll go with Haaland. If not, it's probably Salah. For transfers, I really need to decide whether I'm wildcarding next week or the following week. So I know the game week 9 is the kind of popular benchmark for earmarking a wildcard. I feel a little bit on the edge, not quite there. So it may be that I look at next week, in which case I can take a bit of a punt or potentially get on someone that's rising quickly. But at the moment, I'm trying to stave that off. So I'm hoping that I will be rolling my transfer and then looking at 2 free transfers in game week 8, which will then decide if I feel like a wild card's needed, which I think it will be. But that'll give me a bit more thinking time, I think. So very boring answers from me compared to wildcard man over there, but someone's got to do it.
No, it's fascinating though that we've gotten to game week 7, and this is the first time I think where we've been more than 3 players apart, which is probably showing how ridiculous the template has been at the start of the year. And maybe I've jumped too early, and I completely appreciate that that would be a risk factor for many people. But equally, the upside of finding opportunity in that risk is why I've gone for it. Captain wise, I think I'm going to captain Haaland. I think I'm just
Yeah, I
going to
think I will be.
think I'm just going to leave it there now. To be honest, I mean, as I said, Salah is now kind of in my mind squad player. I'm sorry, PJ. He's a squad player, and he's my eternal vice as well. I mean, with Haaland, you're just dealing with a player who's able to haul in any game, and it's there. And it's there in his name. It's normative determinism. So I think it's just one of those where you're kind of, I'm happy to do it. I think that we're in a bit like last year when Salah was the captain for 10 game weeks or so. We've entered a really kind of cool part, a cool kind of, I know people get excited about differential captains or whatever, but I just don't really like the captainship in general. So I think it's quite nice to just kind of remove that from the equation. If everyone's got the same captain, then there's gains potentially everywhere on the pitch. And I think that that's what's really cool about it, because you're not sat there kind of sweating the EO of two or three of the players in your team and it basically coming down to a 7-man game. I think as it develops and people do start to wildcard and pop off and kind of go in the different directions now, which I really hope will happen after a really boring start to the season in loads of ways. Well, not boring, so I was doing all right, but boring in terms of the discussion being quite lacking. We did a pod on enablers. We've never done that. But hey, I mean, I think that that is going to be really interesting to see, and hopefully will mean that EO isn't a factor for a little while, because I suspect that Haaland's, if he does do well against Spurs, which I would back him to do well against anyone, frankly, if he does do well against Spurs and people have gone to Salah because of the ostensible good fixture for Salah, I think that will be start the ball rolling a bit. But I think there'll be loads of people just kind of thinking, same as me, leave us, I should say, leave on the Haaland and just kind of just deal with the rest of your team. So I think it'll be interesting times ahead, that's for sure. Well, that's your lot. Hopefully that was very useful. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming back, Lucy. Thanks for not running away. I feel like the season's properly started now, and we can get back to regularly scheduled programming after a very nice interlude with loads of with Nick on and things like that. But nonetheless, I think it's good to just get things going as we intended at the start of the season, without any holidays to come.
Well, I think if the wildcards are coming out, then the season really has started, and let's hope it doesn't slow down again. Thanks for listening, everyone. We were Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Twitter at WGTA_FBL, or you can find me at Lucy Hynett with 2 T's. If you enjoyed listening to this, please like and subscribe to the podcast. For new listeners out there, if you think they'll be coming back, please hit that 5-star rating across platforms like iTunes and Spotify so more people can enjoy the pod.
Yep. Thank you very much indeed for listening. Do go ahead and do those things. All good luck to me with my wild card this week. Less luck to you all, because you'll all be on the template team. But either way, we hope to assist you. Farewell and all the best for game week 7.